for those of us who are not in the medical field, you essentially have the technology that allows companies like Johnson & Johnson, their Janssen subsidiary, to develop vaccines and essentially improve the efficiency and the cost controls of producing these vaccines. We've focused so much on COVID-19, but there's a whole myriad of issues out there that are being studied with vaccines. So the role your company plays, because you've just entered into a deal with J&J, what is that role?
Yeah, so the role we play for not just J&J, but for a global population is to help enable the high-speed production of large volumes of low-cost proteins. Proteins are things like antigens for vaccines or therapeutic proteins, things, for example, like oncology, neurodegenerative diseases, neuromuscular diseases, inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases, and a growing number of therapeutic potential treatments that are exploding. I don't know if you recall, but Scott Gottlieb, when he was the chairman or the head of the FDA, had mentioned 2% of the American public has access to biologics. It was 40% of our federal budget for prescription drugs, not before COVID. So that's not a sustainable model of using the existing biomanufacturing platforms to bring products to a global population, let alone even here in America.
Absolutely. And Mark, I know that, for some time you had been looking at the opportunity to really use your technology to help scale vaccines for COVID-19. You've sort of moved past that opportunity now. Are there other vaccines that you anticipate being able to use or help grow?
Yeah, so the technology is basically, it's a platform technology. Again, it's a rapid, low cost, large volume biomanufacturing platform for any type of protein. So we can just pop in the gene and out comes the protein. For example, you can pick the Wuhan, you can take the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and we're already working now on Omicron. So we can not only make one vaccine, we can make multiple vaccines quicker, faster, and cheaper at enormous scale. Because if you remember, we came from the industrial biotech sector where we worked with BASF, DuPont, Shell Oil, and others to make massive amounts of low-cost proteins. So this solution is a global solution that can be used and tech transferred, which we're working on in India and Africa, to be made locally, where these vaccines and drugs are going to be needed and to be used, and they need to be affordable.
How would you give us the context of that in terms of what types of vaccine platforms you can really help with? Because now we've got such an array, especially because of COVID. We've seen so many different types, whether it's mRNA or protein or adenovirus. So where do you see the role for Dyadic in that? Are there specific ones that you cannot, for example, help scale up?
Yeah, so we're a recombinant protein vaccine technology, sort of like what Novavax is doing, but on steroids. They use a insect cell called baculovirus, and we use a filamentous fungal cell. In the Zoonosis Anticipation Preparative Initiative, which was an EU-sponsored program, we produced 300 times more of the antigen from our cell line than the insect cell or baculovirus cell. So if it's a recombinant protein vaccine, which are more traditional. So one of the things that I think is really a shame in this pandemic is that the government didn't support the large-scale mass production of a traditional vaccine like ours, which I think some of the unvaccinated would have taken. It would have saved lives, reduced pain and suffering across America and across the globe. So we're coming a little late to the game, but we're still advancing on our first phase 1 human clinical trial starting in first half of 2022 that we think is going to be a game changer for the global economy.
Mark, when you talk about game changers, this may be out of what you're doing with Janssen and some of your other partners and clients, but is there a vaccine coming that is kind of one shot for all when it comes to the COVID and the COVID variants? We keep hearing, you kind of alluded to it, you just changed the proteins to deal with the different variants. Is there a potential for a vaccine that would anticipate how those proteins might mutate to protect us?
Well, I think that, there's a potential to do all kinds of things. We're being approached, I would say, on a bi-weekly basis with scientists all over the globe that have different ideas how to make what they call a pan-coronavirus vaccine, which would cover a wider variety of the mutations of the emerging variants. But the goal here is to stop the emerging variants from emerging. And in order to do that, we need global supplies of low-cost, affordable vaccines, which is where we come in. But to your point, we can reload the cell line very quickly. Every 60 days, we can pop out a gene, put a new one in. And the difference between a Moderna and a Pfizer mRNA vaccine, these are traditional recombinant proteins, are like a flu shot that people are more comfortable with. And in some cases, as a booster, what's happening now is they're getting an mRNA prime and boost here in America, maybe in a booster. But a recombinant protein vaccine, there's more publications coming out now that are talking about the receptor binding domain, which is where 80% of the neutralizing antibody comes from, which is what our vaccine is based on. Could be an excellent booster. It could take us over the goal line to get better protection or longer term protection or broader protection if we can put 4 different proteins together in the same shot, which is what they do with a flu shot. And we have the capability
Right, Mark,
of making.
I'm glad you talked about that because it looks like you are looking at yourself along the same lines as even the kind of market that Novavax is pursuing, because they too have come in a little bit later. So they also ran into a bit of a manufacturing production. So I know you keep talking about how this is a faster, cheaper way to produce the vaccine. How would you say it's different? Would you be running into some of the same issues in terms of supply chain and manufacturing that some of these other vaccine companies have had?
Yeah, I don't think we'll have the same problem. I think some of the issues speculatively that Novavax had is the more complex manufacturing process. First, the insect cell produces less. As I mentioned in the zoonosis anticipation or ZAPI program in Europe, we were able to make 300 times more in the same tank. So there's a huge difference in capacity. And our vaccine is simple. It's an adjuvant that's available on a worldwide basis. It's alum. It's used in children's vaccines and regular vaccines for decades. And basically a saline solution. So we've already produced it under CGMP in Israel at over 99% purity. So where they were having issues with purity, we've overcome those very quickly. Because you got to remember, we spent 25 years developing this technology for large scale production. We're scaling down, not scaling up with the C1 technology. We used to run it up to 500,000 liters. And if you run at 50,000 liters, we can produce in 5 days potentially more than 1 billion doses of an antigen in a 5-day fermentation process.